The NFL draft just happened, and there's so much you can take away from just a college football perspective. Of course, you've got the mock drafts and who's went up in flames and the stuff about Shador and all that. Yes, everyone's talking about that. But I want to ask you this. I don't know where your mind went watching the draft, but here's where mine went. There's the way we want college football to be, utopian style, and then there's the way college football is, right? So I ask you this. How are we supposed to talk about this sport right now? Forget about the way you want it. The way we want it may not necessarily be the way it is right now, but we are looking at a landscape that's got to change, frankly. One way or the other. It's either got to speed up further down the road it's already on, or it's got to back up and let's reverse course from the road we've gone down. Because right now, you don't have a sport, you got a couple of conferences. And if we want to stop pretending that there are 100-plus teams playing the same caliber of football, and we want to acknowledge that the SEC and the Big Ten are their own level of the sport, and then we divide up accordingly and we have a postseason format accordingly, okay. But we're kidding ourselves if we continue to go down this road, the Power Four road, if you will. There is no Power Four. Not that anyone went into this weekend with that grand illusion, but the NFL draft just slapped us in the face again with a reminder that there's the way you may want it to be, but then there's the way it is. And the way it is the SEC and the Big Ten, I can't believe this is real, just had 150 out of the 257 picks in the draft. And it gets even worse once you focus in the microscope on the first round. Mind-boggling number. 26 of 32 first-round draft picks were from the SEC or Big Ten. Both of them set respective conference records with how many kids they had drafted. The SEC just had 79 picked. The Big Ten had 71. So those are both conference records. Now, I had some of you who spoke up and you said, well, Josh, now that the SEC has Texas and OU, and now that the Big Ten is loaded up on Oregon, and USC, and whatnot, of course they're going to have more picks. I know. That's the point. And then somebody else, in fact, several someone else's said, well, yeah, Josh, but a lot of those draft picks didn't get recruited by those schools they transferred there. Yes, that's also the point. The sport has not calibrated itself, by the way, in any shape, form, or fashion the way that the portal truthers told you it would, or the NIL truthers told you it would. More on that in a little while. The peanut butter, it did get spread out a little bit more, but it's just on two pieces of toast. And maybe Miami's little piece over here and Clemson's little piece, Notre Dame's piece, but by and large, it's just two pieces of toast. That's where all the peanut butter is right now. But go back to the point we were just making. So a bunch of you are listening to this or watching this right now who do not like the way the sport's going. And you think I'm arguing with you. Oh, I'm not. I'm with you. I despise the current setup of this sport, just candidly. I love the sport. I despise that there's this much of the oxygen taken out of the room by two conferences. Confri, the plural of conference. We'll work on that one. I don't like it, but then again, when we get into the live bullets aspects of the regular season, it's not time to worry about what you prefer. And when you talk about how the playoffs should play out, I at least don't look at it and say this thing should be structured to make me feel good. When we're determining strength of schedule, we shouldn't rely on a calculation that provides me a result that makes me feel good. That's not the way I look at the sport. So whether I like it or not, you got to call it as it is once the season gets here. And so the NFL draft, to me, hammered home a couple of points again. The first one is strength of schedule interpretation is broken in college football. And there's another glaring example here of what we often say on this show. One of the biggest lies in all of American sports is in college football when anyone says you are what your record says you are. So let me give you a real-world NFL draft version of that rule. Florida was a 7-5 team in the regular season last year. Ole Miss got crucified for daring to lose to them, right? Hey, quick timeout. Check and see if you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. If you're not, I humbly ask that you click subscribe. It's free. It doesn't sign you up for anything. What it does is it helps us keep this show free so we can just do college football year-round. All right, back to the clip. Because, they're barely a bowl team, 7-5. And people looked at it and they said, oh, it's a terrible loss for Ole Miss. And I looked at it, and we got roasted for this on this show. I said, Florida's not having a season for the ages, but that's actually a really, really high-level quality of opponent that you're playing. And no one wanted to hear it. Not because they didn't think that we could walk it through to a logical conclusion. It's just there are people who hate the SEC, and therefore any argument that would prop up any SEC team that late in the year, therefore prop up Ole Miss's playoff resume, seemingly, was not going to be given the time of day. There was not a lot of rationale in the room, in other words. Florida just had 7 kids drafted. So here's what I did not just say. What I did not just say is Florida belonged in the playoff conversation or anything like that. Of course they didn't. What I'm saying is that was a high-level opponent. The difficulty level in playing Florida last year was obviously a little bit above and beyond what you would expect from your typical, in a vacuum, 7-win caliber team, which is what I've been screaming from the mountaintops for a long time in this sport. I don't need you to give Florida preferential treatment just because even though they lost 5 games, they're going to have a lot of guys drafted, so we need to give them a reward. They get what they deserve in the isolated sense of what a team gets. So Florida went to a low-level bowl game. That's where they belonged. But what I'm talking about is when you look up and down the Big Ten or you look up and down the SEC, and we're talking about relative strength of schedule, this kind of stuff is not the exclusive piece of evidence that I present. It's just a supporting piece of evidence. Not all 8-4 or 7-5 teams in this sport are created equal. By the very nature of how a conference schedule works, therefore a bunch of you play each other, someone's going to tote a bunch of losses that's still pretty good in these conferences. Because your conference record is always relative to how deep or not deep the conference is. So the SEC just sent 79 kids in the NFL draft. The Big Ten sent 71. The SEC had basically half the first round. And the Big Ten had 11, so 26 of the total 32 in the first round. Many of you do not like this. I don't either, but it is. So the strength of schedule reinforcement was the first thing that I took away. The other thing that kept hitting me was what the portal and NIL have done to the sport. I'm pausing. I'm doing the old peepaw lap drum there for a second because this is yet again something I don't particularly love that has happened. But this is one of the told you so moments on the show. That doesn't sound like me. But, back when we were at the dawn of this era, there were 2 camps that formed. You might remember this because it was only 10 minutes ago. And camp number 1 was, man, portal and NIL is going to do way more harm than good to the overall landscape of college football. And that was people like me. And then we got drowned out by people saying, no, what this is going to do is it's going to open the door. Now the big boys can't hoard up all the talent, and now it'll be redispersed all over the country, and the results are going to be so randomized, and it's all BS. What happened was, in a sense, the talent did get divvied up a little bit more. That's the good news, I guess. The bad news, what they forgot to tell you, is the net result was it just got divvied up amongst 2 conferences. Ohio State's players just left and go to a Nebraska or a Purdue. Georgia's players leave and they just go to Texas A&M or Ole Miss. They're not leaving the conference, and if they are, it's because they probably weren't a high enough level player to crack any of the starting rotations for the major teams. Conversely, though, what absolutely is happening over and over and over again is the players that are high-level players on non-SEC and Big Ten rosters are filtering up to those conferences. You saw that over and over again in the draft this past weekend. You saw a kid that may have been from Ole Miss that's only been on Ole Miss's roster for 1 or 2 years, and you're looking at it saying, oh, that's like a vulture credit to Ole Miss. They didn't recruit that kid. They didn't develop that kid, but they're getting credit for him. Yeah, that's the way of the world now. That's the way of the world because that's how portal and NIL works. That's no disrespect to Ole Miss. They did exactly what the game allows them to do, but that's the way it works. But it wasn't too long ago, if you'll remember, some of us said, this isn't going to calibrate the sport like you think it's going to. The net result is just going to be that the rich get richer because there is no long-term change to this sport that doesn't see the same 15 or 20 programs and the same couple of conferences that have always dominated find a way to dominate. There is no landscape change. Do you know why? Because they're the ones in charge of it. So there was no world where they were going to allow this table to permanently shift against themselves. The next question becomes, at the dawn of the revenue sharing era, how will that change things? Because that's a far more fundamental change to college athletics in the sense that we're talking about than the portal and NIL ever were. But I'll tell you what did get validated. I'll tell you what the NFL draft did validate tenfold, and that is recruiting rankings have never been more accurate than they are right now. Now, I got pushback on this when I said it on the internet the other night, but there was no logic-based pushback. The only pushback was anecdotal pushback. It was exception to the rule pushback, which there always will be. Colin, you got that Chris Hummer tweet? Hummer put this out at the conclusion of the first round the other night. And it was first-round draft picks as high school recruits per the 24/7 Sports rankings. 11 former 5-stars went in the first round. 15 former 4-stars went in the first round. So out of the 32 first-round draft picks, 26 of the 32 were former blue-chip recruits. And then out of the other, 5 or 6 or 7, Cam Ward was one of them that everyone tried to throw back. Said, oh, you telling me recruiting rankings are accurate, buddy? What about Cam Ward? Cam Ward was a 0-star recruit. He was. Clearly unique circumstances because he didn't throw the forward pass in high school. But you are right. You are also right that an onion ring occasionally gets mixed in the fries at Burger King. So what did you order? Did you order onion rings or fries? You ordered fries. And you can either be an onion ring truther and let that rogue onion ring, the exception to the rule, dominate the conversation, or you can understand you order fries, you get fries, and because that's what they are. And there may be an onion ring mixed in every now and then. Personally, I always thought Burger King was mixing in the onion ring to convince you need to try our onion rings. That's unofficial. That's not science, but I always thought they were doing that. But Cam Ward's the onion ring, man. He is going to play his pro ball right across the river here. Welcome to Davidson County, sir. He'll probably live in Williamson. But welcome, nonetheless, to Nashville. He's the onion ring. But you see the fries there. 26 of the 32 were former blue-chip recruits. So then, in just a basic misunderstanding of math, I did have one guy who said only 11 of the top 32 picks were former 5-stars. That's terrible. It's phenomenal if you understand how many 5-star graded kids there are per cycle versus how many 4, 3, 2, and 1-star kids. You're talking about 32 5-star graded kids per cycle and thousands of not 5-stars. And you're trying to project 4 years ahead of time how many of them will go first round. And you win 11 of 32. It's phenomenal if you understand the basic numbers and conceptually what you're doing there. So I watched the draft as closely as I ever have. I've got some more to say later in the show from a different slant about it. But yeah, it is so clear that there is not a ditch, there is not a gap, there is a canyon between the top 2 conferences in this sport and everyone else. And so I look at that and I say, they're negotiating the future of the playoff right now. If you take feelings out of it, if you take your emotion out of it, if you take the way you want it to look in a perfect world out of it, you're kind of approaching the point where you can't even seriously pretend that all of those leagues are kind of playing the same sport. They are, in a sense that it's 11 on 11, and they're all playing the same number of games, and any given year, certainly the best team from the Big 12 could be competitive. That's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is those 2 leagues are playing a different caliber sport than everyone else. And so you can either look at it and try and make yourself feel good and say, well, no, the playoff structure should guarantee this or guarantee that. Or you can look at it and say, honestly, if we just went heartless and we just stacked this thing purely in terms of merit, they're looking for 4 auto bid spots apiece. Truth be told, they'd probably get more than 8 apiece if you just did it purely on merit. My advice, by the way, on a related note, to the folks out there in non-Big Ten and SEC shoes is you probably need to agree to that format now that locks you at least as the ACC or the Big 12 into getting guaranteed spots at the table. Because if it were to go the alternative route, you may not even get that. Because that's a trend that's not going to reverse itself, I don't think, in the foreseeable future. I don't like it. In fact, I really, really dislike it, but it doesn't change the fact that it is right now.